This week on The Grit Crusade, different because we all experience life in very personal and different ways. And so I don't want to say that anyone else experiences it the same way as me, but knowing that this is just my journey and my story. Hey, Grit Crusaders. My name is Brooke and I am your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast. We are so excited that you're here to join us. If you're returning, thank you and welcome back. If you're new and it's your first time, you are in for a super deep episode. Like today's episode is going probably deeper than I've ever gone on the podcast before, and definitely as deep as I went on the Navigating Divorce podcast. So we'll make sure that we link that in the show notes for you as well. So if you're interested in that topic, you can jump back on there and see the Navigating Divorce episode, which was my journey from my perspective. So before we jump into today's content, I do want to ask for you to give me a little bit of grace. So typically I have notes and a layout and, kind of a storyline of what I'm going to do on the podcast. And since this story is so personal and so real and raw, I'm just going to be sharing from my heart. And I just have like a couple of notes written down of like making sure that I don't miss some of the big pieces that are so important to this story and my mom's story as well. And I think I could venture to say that the whole podcast was created so I could share this story. If I go back to really psychoanalyzing myself and psychoanalyzing everything, learning how to share my truth and talk about the hard stuff in life came from me surviving suicide. So if there's anybody that you know of that could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. We are about sharing our truth so that we all feel more connected and less alone in this world. And whether you have considered suicide, you know someone who has, or someone who has lost someone to suicide, it is a deeply personal, deeply individual story. And the story that I'm telling today is my story from my perspective. And I say that to be respectful of understanding that my sister's version of the story, my mom's version of the story, my aunt's version of the story, they're all very different because we all experience life in very personal and different ways. And so I don't want to say that anyone else experiences it the same way as me, but knowing that this is just my journey and my story. So in 2013, I was 28 years old and I was teaching school at a middle school. I was in the middle of class, and as a school teacher, you don't answer your phone at school. And my phone lit up and it was my sister calling me, who was also a teacher at a public school. And I thought that was odd, but I didn't answer in the middle of class. And then my dad called and I knew something was wrong. And I walked outside my classroom door and went next door to my co-teacher, Miss Stefan, and I was going to ask her to come watch my class. And our school secretary, Miss Dan Shepard, was walking down the hallway. And I looked at her and she just nodded her head. And I knew in that moment. And on that day in September of 2013, my mother died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She was alone in her apartment in the housing projects in Ola, Arkansas. My sister and brother-in-law found her. They were on their way over to pick her up from a doctor's appointment. And I remember thinking to myself, if I can just get to Saturday. If I can just get to Saturday. I have no idea why that was stuck in my head, but I knew the funeral couldn't be far. It was a Tuesday or Wednesday, and I knew if I could just get to Saturday, because I knew what was required of me as a daughter, as a child, is our duty to bury our parents. And I took that very seriously. I wanted to honor her and make sure that her funeral and everything was as she would have wished it to be. Because as you can imagine, having a daughter like me, I didn't fall far from the tree, and my mom was hell on wheels, and she was amazing, and she was a wonderful mother, and she was the car rider line and sitting in the stands cheering me on at games and driving hours. But she was sick. She was very sick, and thankfully, I didn't know that until I got much older. And as anyone listening to this knows, whether it's you or a family member of yours, you know that if someone has committed suicide, that journey didn't start that day. That journey started years and years prior. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what that journey looked like for me so that you can see that there is hope, but also there is a lot of pain that happens when you are a family member of someone that struggles with mental health and addiction. So as a young girl growing up, my mom was, she was my mom, right? We all know our truths for what they are. I didn't know that people's mothers, didn't get mad and blow up and have issues and leave for days at a time. I didn't know that at 14 years old, driving and picking up my mom's prescriptions and buying her cigarettes at the local corner store, and they knew they weren't for me, wasn't what everyone was doing. I didn't know that every 16-year-old wasn't writing checks and paying bills and doing laundry and making sure we had groceries while my dad was away at work. I didn't know that that wasn't normal. I was a little adult from a very young age. And although it served me well in ways, there was a lot of childhood that I missed out on. Didn't have a lot of friends. We didn't do a lot of social things. That's just not how my family was. I was loved. I was encouraged. And my mom pushed me day in and day out to be the very best version of myself. She gave me so many amazing tools. And I think that when you have a family member that is addicted or that is struggling mentally, so much of who they are becomes the addiction. It becomes their struggle, but that's not who they are. We still have to see the person that's in there. And being on this side of the journey, 10 years after she's died, over 10 years, I see the things I remember are not the pills. They're not the endless doctor's appointments. They're not the surgery after surgery after surgery. It's the little moments that you remember. And so if you're in the middle of this struggle, you're in the middle of this journey, I just encourage you to hold on to those glimmers. Hold on to the glimmers of the love they have for you, of the love they have for your children, of the love they have for their lives, because they're still in there. But the addiction and the struggle is so, so real. And so, like I said, the journey never starts with the event. It started long before that. And so in college, I had moved off. I was cheering for a D1 school, Arkansas Razorbacks, and I was very busy. And so like all college kids, you come home on holidays, you go see your parents for those things, but you're not there in the day-to-day. And I received a phone call one day from my mom's best friend, Brenda, who's also an avid podcast listener of the Grit Crusade. Shout out to Brenda. And she said some version of, your mom is very sick. She doesn't want to live anymore. And we're going to take her to rehab, her and one of my mom's other friends, Nikki. And so that's what they did. They took her to rehab. And the first time it worked. It was great. She came out and she was not on any opioids, which is a addiction journey of its own. She was taking Tylenol. She got a job. She was a clerk at the local Walmart, and she took that shit serious, and she loved it. And she was so proud. And it was like, I had my mom back, because as a child growing up with a parent that is addicted to prescription narcotics, you don't know what it's like for them to not be on those pills, and you think they do have to have them. And she had to have them in her mind to survive. So my memories growing up, hours and hours and hours of sitting in doctor's offices and doctor's appointments, because she was prescribed prescription narcotics at the heart of the opioid addiction. She is a classic case of, we don't really know what's wrong, and so we're just going to keep giving him more. And I'm not saying she's absolved of any, responsibility here, but it is what it is. For those people that were born in the 60s or 70s, they were coming into adulthood and late adulthood in the middle of this crisis that killed millions upon millions of people. It ruined families. It ruined futures. It made grandmas where they will never meet their grandkids. And we are living that. So there is so much responsibility out there on the person that takes the pills, but there's also responsibility on the system. And I will never forget that. But she took the pills and she traded the pills. And when you are addicted, you have friends that are addicts. And when you have some, you better give me some, because when you're out, I'll have some and I'll give them to you. And it is a cycle. It is a vicious, vicious cycle. And so although she did get sober and she did have so many good years, like so many addicts out there, she relapsed. And I also think it's important to point out here that in our family, the words sober, addicted, narcotic, opioid, relapse were never used. I've never heard those words until I was an adult. Those were terms that were used for the really bad people, right? To her, she was just sick. To us, she was just sick. And me and my sister just did what we could. There is no manual for this. There is no guidebook. There's no one telling you this is the next best step, because every rehab says we can do this. But you know what? Those same rehabs let them out with a prescription to opioids. And that's not okay. So as the journey continued, it was December of 2010. And I think I've got my years right. My sister may have to correct me, but December of 2010 or close thereof. And my mom called me and said, I just don't want to live anymore. Can you imagine hearing those words from your parent? So my sister and I went and got her, and we did what all good daughters do. We took her back to rehab because it worked last time, right? Well, it didn't work this time. And they let her out after 3 days because they can't hold them if they don't want to stay. And she was going to be in outpatient care. So for 6 weeks, she was going to live with me and my husband at the time and 2 small children. And these were his children. They were my bonus children. And she was going to go to treatment and live with us, which I was so happy about because I thought she'll be here. I'll be able to take care of her because she lived an hour and a half from me normally. And I wake up the very next morning and she's in my backyard with a steak knife slitting her wrist. And if you know anything about cutting, and I'm no expert, remember I'm talking from my experience alone. A steak knife is not going to do the job. Okay? So in that situation, in that instance, she was not trying to kill herself. She was trying to absolve some sort of pain she was feeling and get attention, the best I know. So she says she can't live there anymore. She's too close to my dad, who she's no longer married to, and she wants to go to my sister's house. And at this point, it's December 23rd. So this may have been 2012. It may have been the year before. And it's December 23rd, which is the day before Christmas Eve. So I meet my sister halfway. My sister takes her to her house, and she's going to stay with my sister. Because in the holidays, no mental health facilities accept new patients because they're short-staffed. And the holidays are hard. They're really hard for people that are struggling. So the next morning, my sister wakes up. She has 3 small children at home. And my mom takes her purse and says to my sister, I'm leaving. My sister says, no, you're not. I have your keys. And my mom says, no, I stole them. And she gets in the car and she leaves. And my mom is not supposed to be left alone at this point, obviously, for obvious reasons. And so my sister calls me crying hysterically. What do I do? What do I do? I don't know what direction she went. I don't know where to go. And it's Christmas morning. And I said, call the police. The police have more resources than we do. They will help you find her. Tell them what car she's driving. Tell them what has happened and that we need your help. And so she called them, and my sister lived on one side of the Arkansas River Bridge. My mom lived on the other. And so the police had a policeman at her house waiting in case she were to come home, and she did. And when she saw the policeman, she backed up, she turned around, she got in a high-speed chase with police. She locked up her brakes on the Arkansas River Bridge between Dardanelle and Russellville, and she jumped. She jumped off the bridge on Christmas morning when it was below 30 degrees, and the policeman drove down to the bottom of the bridge to jump in after her. And she lived, y'all. She lived. Broken ribs, collapsed lungs. I get the phone call on Christmas morning that she's jumped. I fell down on the floor. And I don't know if the next part is a testament to who I am or the ability to go through really hard shit. But after I got the phone with my sister, I said, well, let me know when med flight lands in Little Rock because I know they're going to be flying her down here. And I got dressed and I went to my family Christmas at my dad's house. And after we opened presents, I asked my dad and stepmom to come in the bedroom and I told them what happened. And I told them we would have to leave early and not be able to stay for dinner because we were going to have to go to the hospital in Little Rock. And when I got to the hospital in Little Rock and she was in the emergency room, she was belligerent and we got into a huge argument. And if you have ever had a loved one that is addicted, it is so hard not to lose your temper. It is so hard not to lose it and be so angry and so mad. And in that moment, my mom said to me, you always loved your grandmother more than me. You thought she was perfect. Well, she was not. And how that had anything to do with what had just happened showed me in that moment how sick she really was. Because for addicts, they always want to pass the blame because looking in the mirror is too hard. And it didn't make me love my mother less. It made me understand her more. And so being able to actually see those situations for what they are helps so much, but it is so hard to do at the time. So after healing from her injuries, she swore she was better. She would never try this again. She got a little bit better and then she didn't. She got a little bit better and then she didn't. Back and forth. She was living independently. She was living on her own. She had boyfriends. She had all this. She had a life and it seemed like things were kind of okay. I wouldn't say like that she was well. So I think that was December of 2012. If you ever read a book, I've written about this later, which I plan to do as well. Cross-check my dates. I could be wrong here because it all tends to get fuzzy, y'all. I mean, there's so much that happens. It's like this brain fog just takes over you. And if you're with me and you get it, oh, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. So months had passed, maybe a year, and she got really sick again. I say sick, she was having severe pains in her neck and she had this traction machine and she had seen, so the time of this recording of this podcast, it's 2024. 11 years prior, pain clinics were everywhere and people were pharmacy hopping and the technology wasn't what it is today. So today you can walk into a doctor's office and a pharmacy and they can see like all the prescriptions you have everywhere. Well, 11 years ago, it wasn't like that. 11 years ago, you could hop from doctor to doctor to doctor and get script and script and script. So in the meantime, I find, after she's passed away, I find all these things in her purse. She's getting prescriptions filled in Conway, which is 45 minutes from where she lives. She's going to doctors in 3 towns over. And so it's a whole system that they figure out a way to get all these meds. And so she's in pain again. She wants to die. This is the word she says to the nurse over the phone. And they say, well, you need to come in so we can see you at the ER. Well, if anybody says I want to die, I'm hurting so bad I want to die, they have to tell you to come in. So my sister and I leave our jobs. Off we go to the hospital. We sit in the hospital. It's a pain call. So we sit there for like 6-8 hours, St. Vincent's in Little Rock, for them to let us know that they're not giving her more prescription meds. They see this for what it is. Okay. They know. They can see all of her prescriptions. They can see what's going on. They can see we have a chronic addiction here. And so they keep her overnight to watch her. And then the next morning I get a call. Hey, I'm being let out. I need you to take me halfway. I'm meeting this guy who's picking me up. And I'm like, this guy, never even met this man before. Didn't know she was dating him. Didn't know she was talking to him. Had no idea. Still don't even remember the guy's name. And so this guy is taking her to her house and my sister's coming to her house the next morning, September of 2013, to take her to a follow-up appointment. So this guy takes her to her house. My sister calls her the next morning. She's like, can you call me back? I'm still asleep. And my sister says, well, I'm going to be there in 1 hour to pick you up for your doctor's appointment. And as the rest of the story goes, like I told you at the beginning of the episode, my sister and brother-in-law get there. The door is what they find out later, propped, wedged closed with a chair behind it. So they have to bust the door open. My sister knew my mom wasn't answering. It wasn't good. And they find her in the bathtub. She's written 137 suicide notes. 137, y'all. And my sister and I decided to not share those notes with anyone. We decided to keep them private between us because they did not shine a good light on people that we love. They didn't shine a good light on my mother, and they were not from a place of love, and she was not in her right mind at that time. But I will give you a little bit of information from the notes. So there were dozens of notes written. I'm out of cigarettes. I'm out of cigarettes. I have no more cigarettes. I need more cigarettes. And my mom was a smoker. She loved her good Marlboro. And there were boxes of cigarettes all over that place, y'all. And so all I can rationalize is it was a manic phase of not being aware of reality. And so after my sister found her and they called me, of course I go and I come back before the funeral and I have the letters given to a therapist at my church who analyzes them. And for those of you who have walked the journey of addiction, personally or with a loved one, depression, suicidal ideation, you have had this question. And this was the question. I sat down with Joan, who was my therapist at the time at our church, and I said, why wasn't I enough? Why couldn't she live for me? And she said, for 28 and a half years, she chose you. Every day that she didn't do it, you were on her mind. So know that it's not just your loved ones choosing the drug, the alcohol, the porn, the cocaine, the fentanyl. Every moment, every time they don't do it, they're choosing you. They're choosing their love. But it's a monster, and it is hard. And after my mom died, I did not believe that addicts could recover. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was a unicorn until I met my brother-in-law, Tanner. Some of you know his story of his fentanyl addiction and recovery. He unfortunately died almost a little over a year after his recovery from a work-related accident. But that man showed me that it's possible. So I have lived both the unrecovered and the recovered. But you are not alone. And I see you. And I hope this podcast lands in your life at just the right time, where I can encourage you to love them through it. And even if they don't make it out, even if their physical body isn't here anymore, they loved you. They chose you over and over again, and that you were worth it. But this was their battle, and you can't fight it for them. You can only fight it alongside them. And sometimes that requires removing someone out of your daily life. Sometimes that requires putting a distance, but you can still love and support them. But this is their journey and their battle. And there is no guidebook, and there is no thing that you should have done. If you showed love and compassion in the way you knew how at the time, that's all you could do. The guilt and shame that loved ones of addicts and people that have struggled and lost people with suicide feel is not real. That feeling is of the devil, and you don't have to carry it. It's a real feeling that you feel, but it is not real put here by God, and it was not put on you by your loved one. You didn't do anything to start this, and you can't, unfortunately, do anything to stop it, but love them through it and show genuine patience and kindness when you can. That doesn't mean let someone run over you. That doesn't mean that you don't have to set up boundaries, but love them through it. Until next time.